So when I read the script, I called my agent and said, whatever.
Wow.
It didn't really matter to me. And then he said, no, they want you to play Red.
The Shawshank Redemption cast has been sitting on secrets for more than 25 years, things they never shared with fans or the media. What are these hidden stories, and why did they keep them under wraps for so long? Join us as we look at the untold stories and reveal what the cast finally decided to share after all this time. A real prison. When people talk about the Shawshank Redemption, they often mention how real the prison feels. That's not just great set design or clever lighting. It's because the prison wasn't a set at all. It was a real prison, the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio. This place had a long, painful history, and it played a huge role in shaping the mood of the movie. The Ohio State Reformatory was built in the late 1800s and opened in 1896. It was originally designed to reform young men through a mix of education, religion, and discipline. But over the decades, that idea faded. The prison became overcrowded and dangerous. Stories began to surface about horrible conditions, violent fights, and serious mistreatment of inmates. By the time it was shut down in 1990, just 4 years before Shawshank started filming, it had earned a reputation as one of the most inhumane prisons in the United States. The government didn't shut it down because it was old or out of style. It was closed because lawsuits were filed over how prisoners were being treated. The cells were tiny, dark, and freezing in the winter. Some didn't have running water. People who served time there often left with emotional scars that stayed with them for life. So when the filmmakers chose to shoot there, they weren't just using an old building. They were stepping into a place filled with real pain and history. The cast and crew felt that history the moment they walked in. Tim Robbins, who played Andy Dufresne, later spoke about how deeply the prison affected him. He described sitting alone in one of the 6-by-8-foot cells during breaks between scenes. The walls were cold and stained. The door would shut, and suddenly he felt trapped, not just physically but emotionally too. It triggered something in your brain, Robbins said. It wasn't pretend. That fear, that panic, it was real. Robbins used that feeling to help him better understand his character. Andy spends decades behind bars, isolated and unsure of his future. By placing himself in the same environment, one that had once held real prisoners, Robbins was able to bring a quiet intensity to his performance. He wasn't just acting, he was responding to the space around him. Clancy Brown, who played Captain Hadley, the cruel prison guard, also spoke about the prison's heavy atmosphere. He said it wasn't like walking onto a regular film set. It felt more like stepping into the past. The smells, the silence, the way sound echoed down the empty hallways. All of it created a mood that was hard to shake. You didn't have to pretend to be angry or harsh, Brown said. The building did half the work for you. The decision to film in a real prison gave The Shawshank Redemption a level of truth that few movies ever reach. It made every moment feel grounded, raw, and full of meaning. Hidden inmates. One of the most surprising secrets behind The Shawshank Redemption is that many of the background actors in the movie were not actors at all. They were real former inmates. Director Frank Darabont made the bold choice to bring in men who had actually served time at the Ohio State Reformatory, the same prison where the movie was being filmed. This decision wasn't just creative, it was personal, emotional, and deeply effective. Darabont wanted Shawshank to feel as real as possible. He knew that no matter how skilled an actor might be, there are things about prison life that only someone who has lived it can truly understand. The way prisoners walk, how they sit, how they look around without drawing attention to themselves. These small details are almost impossible to teach. That's why he asked real former inmates to take part in the film as extras. They were placed in background scenes like the prison yard, the cafeteria, and the work crew groups. You've probably seen them without even knowing it. That's because they weren't acting in a traditional way. They weren't trying to stand out or steal a scene. They were just being themselves. Their performances were natural and quiet. Some had spent years inside those same walls. Returning to the prison brought back strong memories, and that showed in their body language and facial expressions. They didn't have to pretend what it was like to be in prison. They already knew. One of the most important things these former inmates brought to the movie was authenticity. When you watch the film closely, you'll notice that the background doesn't feel like acting. The people look like they belong there. They're not doing too much. They're not over-exaggerating. Whether they're standing in line for food, walking across the yard, or sitting alone with their thoughts, their movements feel real. That's because they are real. It's the kind of realism that can't be faked. This realism didn't just help the background scenes, it also helped the main actors. Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, and the rest of the cast fed off the energy and mood that these former inmates brought with them. Seeing how the extras moved and reacted made the lead actors step into their own roles more deeply. It grounded the entire production in a sense of truth. Walls tell stories too. One of the most clever and subtle details in The Shawshank Redemption is something that most viewers don't notice right away. The prison walls actually age backward. It's a small part of the production design, but it makes a huge difference in how the story feels as it moves through time. This idea came from the film's designers, who wanted to create a visual way to show the passing of decades without relying on titles or dialogue. The story of Shawshank spans more than 20 years. It begins in the late 1940s and moves through the 1950s and into the 1960s. Instead of putting the year on the screen each time the timeline shifts, the filmmakers used the walls of the prison to tell the audience where they were in time. When you watch the movie closely, you'll notice that the walls look older and more damaged in scenes that take place later in the story. But in flashbacks or earlier parts of the timeline, the walls look newer, cleaner, and better maintained. This idea came from the production design team, who carefully changed the appearance of the prison for different scenes. They adjusted things like paint, grime, cracks, and water damage to make the walls match the time period. In earlier scenes, they would add more light, cleaner surfaces, and fewer signs of wear. In later scenes, the walls become darker, more worn out, and full of stains. It's a slow, quiet shift, but it supports the story in a powerful way. This visual timeline helps guide the viewer through the decades. You may not even realize it's happening, but your brain picks up on the changes. Without saying a word, the movie shows you that time is passing. Andy Dufresne is getting older, the prison is getting more run down, and life inside Shawshank is slowly changing. It adds depth to the film without needing extra lines or explanations. But this detail does more than just mark time. It also supports some of the film's main themes like decay, memory, and emotional transformation. As the years go by, both the prison and the people inside it begin to break down. The walls reflect that decay. They hold the weight of what's happened there, the pain, the fear, and sometimes even the small moments of hope. They become a silent record of all the emotions the characters go through. Stephen King's gamble. One of the most surprising facts about The Shawshank Redemption is that it all started with a single dollar. That's right, Stephen King, one of the world's most famous authors, sold the film rights to his novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption for just $1. It wasn't because he needed the money. It was because he believed in giving new filmmakers a chance. King had a program called the Dollar Baby Deal. It was something he started to help aspiring directors get their foot in the door. The idea was simple. If a student or young filmmaker wanted to adapt one of his short stories into a film, they could do it legally by paying only $1. It was a symbolic fee that showed King's support for creative talent, not business profits. Frank Darabont, who was still early in his career at the time, had already made a short film based on another King story. King had been impressed by his work, so when Darabont asked to turn Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption into a full-length movie, King agreed. Even though he wasn't sure how the story would work on screen, he trusted Darabont's vision enough to give him the rights for just $1. That simple deal gave Darabont something more valuable than money: creative freedom. Because this wasn't a big studio project in the beginning, Darabont had full control over how to tell the story. There were no executives looking over his shoulder, no pressure to make it a flashy, action-packed blockbuster. He could take his time, focus on the script, and build the story in the quiet, powerful way he believed in. Tim Robbins, who played Andy Dufresne, later said that one of the best parts of the project was how relaxed it felt. "We weren't making a blockbuster," he said. "There was no pressure to sell tickets or meet expectations. We were just trying to make something meaningful." This kind of working environment allowed the cast and crew to be fully committed to the emotional truth of the story. There was no rush, no stress, just a shared goal of making something great. Low expectations actually became one of the film's greatest strengths. Because there was so little outside pressure, the people making Shawshank could concentrate on the characters, the setting, and the heart of the story. They didn't have to worry about adding explosions or plot twists to keep an audience entertained. Instead, they told a slow, quiet, deeply emotional story about hope, friendship, and freedom. Morgan Freeman, who played Red, even said it was one of the few times in his career where everything just felt right. He described the film as comfort food for the soul, something people come back to again and again because it makes them feel something real. That kind of emotional honesty is rare in Hollywood, and it happened here in large part because the project wasn't driven by money or fame. Over time, The Shawshank Redemption went from being a small, quiet film to one of the most beloved movies ever made. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, the movie flopped at the box office when it first came out. But thanks to home video, television, and word of mouth, the film slowly built a massive following. Today, it's considered a classic, and it all began with a $1 deal, a little trust, and a lot of creative freedom. Secret backstories. One of the most powerful things about The Shawshank Redemption is how real the characters feel. Every look, every word, every quiet moment seems full of meaning. A big reason for that is the work the actors did behind the scenes, especially Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins. They didn't just read their lines, they went deeper. They built entire lives for their characters, even if those details never made it into the final script. Morgan Freeman played Ellis Boyd Red, the man who narrates the story and becomes Andy Dufresne's closest friend in prison. While Red's backstory is lightly touched on in the movie, he's in prison for murder. It's not deeply explored. But Morgan Freeman decided that wasn't enough. He wanted to truly understand who Red was. So he created his own backstory. In his version, Red was a numbers runner before he went to prison. A numbers runner is someone who handles illegal gambling bets, basically part of a small-time street lottery operation. Freeman imagined that Red came from a tough background, got pulled into the gambling world as a teenager, and then ended up in worse trouble when a crime went too far. Freeman said that understanding Red's early life helped him figure out how the character would carry himself, how he would speak, and even how he would react to other inmates. This invisible backstory shaped every part of his performance. It gave Red layers. He wasn't just an inmate who gave wise advice. He was someone who had made mistakes, lived a dangerous life, and found a strange kind of peace inside Shawshank. That's why Red's relationship with Andy feels so real. Freeman played him as someone who recognized Andy's innocence and honesty, but also saw how much strength Andy had. Red became a guide, a friend, and eventually someone who dared to hope again, all because of that deeper character work. Tim Robbins, who played Andy Dufresne, also did his own form of deep preparation. Robbins is known for his thoughtful acting, and Shawshank was no exception. He didn't just memorize lines or show up on set. He wanted to feel what Andy felt. To do this, Robbins spent time alone in the prison cells before filming. He would sit in the silence without any crew or distractions and let the stillness sink in. He later said that these moments helped him understand the loneliness, fear, and quiet determination his character needed to survive. He imagined what it would be like to lose everything, to be falsely accused, and to live behind bars for decades. Those feelings stayed with him during filming and added real emotion to his scenes. Symbolism in every frame. One of the reasons The Shawshank Redemption is so powerful is because it tells its story in more than just words. The movie uses visual symbolism in nearly every frame to show how the characters feel and what they're going through, especially when it comes to the idea of being trapped, both physically and emotionally. Bars, windows, and framing are used again and again throughout the film to remind us that the characters are prisoners. But they're not just locked up in a physical prison. They're also dealing with emotional and mental confinement, things like guilt, hopelessness, regret, and fear. Many shots are framed so that characters are seen through bars or small windows, even when they're not in their cells. This shows that prison follows them everywhere. The walls are always around them, and freedom feels like something far away. Sometimes the camera places characters behind door frames or through wire fences. These aren't just artistic choices. They're carefully planned decisions meant to tell the audience that the character is still trapped in some way. Even Red, who seems calm and wise, is often shown with barriers around him. It's not until the very end of the movie, when he's finally free and walking toward the ocean, that we see him completely unframed, open to the world. One key moment that shows a big emotional shift is the rooftop scene. This is when Andy and the other inmates are tarring the roof, and Andy offers to help a guard with his finances. At first, the others think he's making a mistake, but soon they're all sitting back, enjoying cold beers in the sun. According to Morgan Freeman, this is the scene where Andy truly starts thinking about escaping, not just from prison, but from the fear that has held him back since his conviction. And of course, we can't talk about symbolism without mentioning the film's most famous quote, "Get busy living or get busy dying." This line is simple, but it says everything about the journey of both Andy and Red. At first, Red doesn't believe in hope. He sees it as dangerous. But over time, watching Andy refuse to give up, he starts to believe again. Andy lives by this idea from the very start. He knows he didn't kill his wife, and he never lets the prison take away who he is inside. He fights to stay alive in every way, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. When he finally escapes, it's not just a physical break from Shawshank. It's a complete rejection of the fear and darkness that could have destroyed him. Brooks' real inspiration. One of the most touching parts of The Shawshank Redemption is the story of Brooks Hatlin, the elderly prison librarian who is released after spending decades behind bars. His release is not a joyful event, it's heartbreaking. But what many people don't know is that this character was inspired by someone very real and almost didn't make it into the movie. Actor James Whitmore, who played Brooks, based the character on his own father. Whitmore's father had a calm and gentle way of speaking. He was quiet and moved slowly, and Whitmore remembered those qualities as he prepared for the role. He didn't just memorize lines. He thought deeply about who Brooks was as a person. Whitmore believed that Brooks had spent so much time in prison that he no longer knew how to live outside. That belief helped him create a layered, deeply human performance. Some of Brooks's most emotional moments weren't even in the script. Whitmore added small actions and choices that helped audiences connect with the character. One of the most powerful examples is the bird scene, when Brooks feeds a small black crow named Jake. In the film, he gently slips food to the bird during mealtimes and later releases it before he leaves prison. That little bird became a symbol of his routine, his care, and his connection to something alive. The idea of feeding Jake didn't come from Stephen King's original story. It wasn't even a major plot point in early versions of the script. Whitmore himself suggested it. He felt Brooks needed something to love, something that made his world feel a little less empty. The bird gave Brooks a reason to get up every day and added a deeply emotional layer to his character. It's such a simple moment, but it says so much about loneliness, connection, and what happens when those things are lost. Despite how memorable Brooks' story became, the studio originally wanted to cut it. Executives felt it slowed the film down or distracted from the main plot about Andy and Red, but director Frank Darabont strongly disagreed. He believed Brooks' story was essential because it showed what can happen to a person when prison becomes their whole world. Darabont fought hard to keep the scenes, and in the end, he won. Andy's posters. In The Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne's cell wall becomes one of the most iconic parts of the film. At first, it just looks like decoration, something to brighten up a dark prison cell. But the posters on Andy's wall are actually full of meaning. They don't just cover the tunnel he's digging, they also mark his emotional journey and transformation across the decades. When Andy first arrives at Shawshank, his world has completely fallen apart. He's been wrongly convicted, thrown into a violent place, and forced to find a way to survive. The first poster he puts up is of Rita Hayworth, a famous actress from the 1940s. The poster is glamorous, bold, and classic, just like how Andy still appears at this stage. He hasn't fully let go of his old life yet. He's quiet, mysterious, and keeping his thoughts to himself. The Hayworth poster represents that early version of Andy, calm on the outside but hiding something beneath the surface. As the years pass, Andy replaces Rita Hayworth with a new poster, Marilyn Monroe. This change reflects how Andy is adjusting to life in prison. Monroe, with her playful and lively image, signals a shift in his attitude. He starts opening up more, forming deeper connections with Red and others. He's no longer just surviving, he's adapting, thinking long-term. At this point in the film, he begins helping the warden with money laundering and creates the prison library. The Monroe poster shows that Andy hasn't given up. He's making moves behind the scenes and planning for the future. Finally, in the later part of the film, Raquel Welch becomes the poster on the wall. This is the most important one because it covers the tunnel Andy has been digging for years. Welch's image from the movie 1 Million Years BC shows her standing strong and confident. For Andy, this poster marks the last phase of his transformation. He's now fully committed to escaping. He's not the same man who first walked into Shawshank. He's stronger, smarter, and ready to take back his life. Flop to icon. When The Shawshank Redemption was first released in 1994, most people didn't see it. Despite strong performances from Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and a powerful story based on a work by Stephen King, the film made only a modest $16 million during its initial run in theaters. For a film with such emotional depth and critical praise, this result was disappointing. So what went wrong? There were several reasons the film didn't succeed at the box office. First, the title confused audiences. The Shawshank Redemption didn't tell people what the movie was about, and many assumed it was a religious or historical film. Second, it had tough competition. That year saw the release of Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, and The Lion King, all of which pulled in massive audiences. Finally, despite strong word of mouth, it wasn't enough to drive people to theaters. Viewers who did see it loved it, but there simply weren't enough of them at first. But this is where the story of Shawshank takes a turn. After the film's theatrical run ended, Warner Brothers released it on VHS, a common home video format at the time. Blockbuster and other video rental chains stocked the movie in huge numbers. Suddenly, people who had never seen it in theaters were watching it in their living rooms. Word spread quickly. People started telling their friends, "You've got to see this movie." And they listened. Then came cable TV. TNT, a popular American network, began airing The Shawshank Redemption regularly. Not just once or twice a year, but dozens of times. In fact, at one point, TNT showed the movie so often that it became a running joke. But this constant exposure had a major impact. Viewers didn't just see the film once, they watched it again and again. And with every viewing, the emotional weight of the story hit deeper. Audiences began to understand and connect with the characters more and more. Morgan Freeman later said that the movie became something special for many people. He called it comfort food for the soul. And he's right. The Shawshank Redemption offers hope in dark places. It speaks about friendship, patience, and the human spirit. It's about the power of believing in something, even when life seems impossible. These themes never get old, and they hit home for viewers of all ages, backgrounds, and generations. Over time, the movie's reputation grew. It began topping lists of the greatest films ever made. On IMDb, the world's most popular movie site, The Shawshank Redemption, has often held the #1 spot above even The Godfather. People didn't just like it, they loved it deeply. They shared it with others, studied it in school, and quoted it often. What started as a forgotten box office disappointment slowly became a cultural icon. And it didn't happen because of expensive marketing or flashy effects. It happened because the film touched something real in people. It offered them a story that made them feel less alone, more hopeful, and more connected to others. An almost conclusion. One of the most unforgettable moments in The Shawshank Redemption is the final scene on the sunny beach in Zihuatanejo, where Andy Dufresne and Red finally reunite after years apart. It's a beautiful, hopeful ending that leaves audiences with a strong feeling of freedom and new beginnings. But here's a surprising fact. This iconic scene was actually filmed first, and almost didn't make it into the movie at all. The filmmakers shot the beach reunion early in production, before most of the prison scenes were filmed. Director Frank Darabont wanted to have that moment ready because he believed it was the emotional heart of the story. Showing the hope and promise of a fresh start gave the entire film a direction. But when the studio executives saw the scene, they weren't convinced. Some thought it was too uplifting and didn't fit the darker tone they expected from a prison drama. Others worried it was too different from the rest of the movie, and might confuse audiences. Because of this, the studio pushed to cut the beach scene entirely. They felt the story should end with Andy's escape or Red's parole, which were more grounded moments. But Darabont fought hard to keep the scene. He argued that the final reunion was crucial. It gave the movie its emotional payoff. It wasn't just about the physical escape from prison, but about the freedom of the human spirit. Darabont believed that without this hopeful ending, the movie would lose its soul. This disagreement between the director and the studio shows a common challenge in filmmaking. Studios often want movies to fit a certain mold, focusing on action or suspense. Directors like Darabont want to tell deeper stories that explore emotions and ideas. Luckily, Darabont's vision won out, and the beach scene remained. If you enjoyed this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more movie stories, and drop a comment about your favorite part of the film. See you in the next video.